Real estate investment practice problem using Excel. Amortization schedule. As we change the payments, we'll take a look at the impact on the loan term as we hold everything else constant. Get ready because it's time to raise the stakes with real estate. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet and would like to follow along, note that we have 3 tabs on down below: the example tab, the practice tab, and the blank tab. Let's take a quick look at them. First, starting with the example tab, in essence being an answer key. We're focusing in on the term this time, and note there's a few little twists, a little problems with relation to the terms that we will add as we go through this practice problem. Basic idea being that we're going to be changing the payment amount as if we know what the payment amount will be, and then look at the impact on the years being the dependent variable as we hold everything else constant, including the home value, 20% down, $40,000, therefore loan amount $160, and the rate then being the 5%. We're going to calculate the payment amount down below, or give a series of payments amounts, and then calculate the exact years, try to figure out the years with a formula so we can see that side by side. And then noting that we do not typically see loans that are going to be in strange periods such as 35.91 years or 27.05. So we'll round those years, and we'll try to round them to increments of 25 years to say, okay, if it goes into this range, we're going to round it up to the next increment of 25. So we'll practice that little problem of rounding. We'll do a similar kind of thing up top. We'll also put our drop-down table down here. So a little bit of a twist with this one, a little bit of a twist if you've been following along with the prior presentations. Also note that in our table, we have added 40 to go down to 40-year loan in the instance that we have a 40 years, so we'll have 40-year periods. We also see that if we have periods that are less than the full term of the table, that the table has been set up to cover, we have that situation where things turn negative. As you can see here, the end of this particular loan term is at 15 years. The table continues to go on, therefore everything below this point is not relevant. But our worksheet should still work because we do have the monthly amounts that are still being populated here, and we can get the totals by calculating the totals for the total payments here and the total interest. So it should be okay. We're going to then add the pivot table. So we'll add the pivot table, and then we'll use that pivot table to create some other information that we might want to put together just to see how we can do that, noting again that we're going to have these differences in the loan terms as we put this other information together as well. Okay, so if we go to the second tab, the practice tab, then we have some of this information pre-populated or pre-formatted, so you could then not spend so much time on the formatting and just enter the data into here and focus in on that. So you got some pre-formatted cells. But in the blank tab, that's where we're going to do all the new stuff from scratch, and it's going to be great. There's a little bit of a change to our data, so let's take a look at it. We got the home. We're going to keep fixed at the $200,000 this time, 20% down still. That means the $40,000 down payment, loan amount, $200,000 minus the 40, or $160,000. We're going to be figuring the periods, the term, which is the years, based on changes to the payments that we're going to have down below. That will calculate the months for us. Rate will be constant at the 5%. Now, note here we have the 2 payment amounts, because what we're going to do is we're going to figure out the payment amount. Let's say we're just going to be saying, well, I can afford $1,000, let's say. But then we're going to try to round the years to increments of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and so on, because that's usually the available loan terms. And then once we round the years to increments of 5, we'll calculate the adjusted payment, which will be slightly different than our payment amount based on the rounded period. So that's a bit of a twist that we will have. Let's do that calculation now. Well, let's assume that we have the 1,000. Now, up here in the years, we're going to calculate the term. Notice this is just another kind of adjustment. Normally, people are good at typing in the PMT, calculating the payment. We've done a few times. It's the same components will be involved, except on the second argument, the NPER, that's the term that we are looking for. So we're going to start with the function of, instead of payment, the number of periods equals NPER, number of periods. Double clicking on that. Now you can't usually put a negative in front of this one, or it can kind of throw things off. So don't start with a negative typically. We're going to pick up the rate, which is going to be the 5%. And then I'm going to say that's got to be divided by 12 because that's the yearly rate. We want the monthly rate, comma. The payment needs to typically, this is where you need to have a negative typically. So you got to say negative of the $1,000 on the payment. And then, comma, the present value is going to be the loan amount, which we can't see up top, but it's right there in cell B4. In cell B4 at the 200,000 minus the 40. So if I say enter on that, we should get then the number of months. That should give us then the number of months. What I would like to see in this cell, however, is the number of years and then calculate the number of months down below it. So to get to the number of years, I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to take this whole thing and just simply divide it by 12. Divided by 12, and we get the years at the 22. Now note, of course, that's not even. If I go over here to the Home tab and add some numbers, that's not an even 22, and we would like it like intervals of 25 would be the most common kind of loan terms. So normally we would say, okay, if it's going to take 22, we probably have to round that up to say 25. So is there a way that we could basically round this up? We could use a rounding function. And usually I would think we would want to round it up. We're not going to be able to round down typically to 20. We're probably going to say, okay, let's go to the next incremental up, which would be 20, which would be the 25 possibly. Now, if you were to just round it up to say 22 and get rid of the decimals, it would look something like this. You could say, okay, I'm going to embed the rounding function. And this gets a little bit fancy, I know, but we're going to get a little bit tricky here. So we're going to say round. Let's say we're going to round up. We always want to round up and select that. Now that round up is before the NPR calculation. And if I go to the end of it, then we've got the second argument, which I say comma. There's our second argument. And to round it up to the whole number, we put a 0 there. And that would round it up to the whole number. It's going to put the bracket around it to close it up. And so now it's at the 22. So that's one way we can do it to get it nice to a nice even year so we don't have these fractions of a year, which typically would not be relevant for a loan. The other thing you could do is round up, and that's an easier function to use to round it up into increments of 10. If I wanted to round it up to increments of 10, I would have to use a negative number over here. So this last argument, the number of digits, I'd say -1, and that would round it up to increments of 10. And that works pretty good because you get 10, 20, 30, 40 increments. But usually we want to round it up to basically increments of 5 is what I would like to do here. So that gets a little bit more tricky. So the increments of 5 calculation, let's try to do that. We got to use a different function to do that. So I'm going to say, okay, let's get rid of this round down thing. No more round down. We're starting with our starting point, which is simply the NPER. That's going to give us our 22.02 as we had last time. And now we got this other one that's kind of like a rounding function, but it's a little bit more fancy. We're going to put our cursor before, right after equal, before the NPR, and we're going to kind of embed this new one in there. So this is going to be we call it the ceiling math, which is a weird calculation, rounds a number up to the nearest integer or the nearest multiple of significance. Okay, that's the one we want. So we're going to double click on that one. Same kind of thing. The whole thing is embedded. So this whole argument is in the number column. Here it's embedded in there. Then we're going to go to the end of it. And I'm just going to say comma. And now I want it to go to -5. That's going to be what I want it to go to, -5. And so now it's going to close up the brackets for me. Say yes. And now we got that fanciness that it brings it up to 25, which is nice. So I'm going to do that. We'll do that again. I know that was a bit complicated. You don't have to do that. You could deal with those messy kind of numbers in there, but wanted to get a little fancy down here. Let's do it down here. Let's do it again. Payment years. And then I'm going to say round up or round to 5s, something like that for our headers. Let's go ahead and make this black and white. Home tab, font group, black and white. Let's center it, alignment and center. So there we have that. And let's start with our payments. Let's say we're going to go from $800 and then just go up by $100 to like $2,000. So I'm going to say this equals the $800 above it plus the 100. And I'm going to copy that down to cell 28, auto-filling it down. It'll copy the one above it and add $100 until we get to 2,000. Let's center that, alignment and center. So now we're going to do our same calculation here. I'm going to say, okay, if I did my number of periods calculation, this would equals the NPER. If I had an $800 payment, and then I'm going to double click on the number of periods, we would have a rate. The rate would be the 5%. That's the yearly rate. We're going to divide it by 12 to get the monthly rate, comma. The payment typically needs to be negative, which is a bit tricky, negative of that $800. So negative of the 800, and then we're going to say, comma, the present value is going to be the loan amount of the $160,000. And if I hit enter there, that's going to give us the not years, but months, because this is in terms of months. So if I double click on that and go to the end of it, divide it by 12, then that should give us our years. We could add decimals if we select these items, go to the Home tab, Number Group. I'm going to add a couple decimals so it's rounded to 35 point, or not rounded, to 35.91 years. Now I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. I'm going to make absolute what we need to make absolute so I can copy it down. The rate at the 5%. Want to make that absolute so I can copy it down, selecting F4 on the keyboard, $ before the B and the 7. Then we have the payment. That's not absolute, because that I do want to copy down as we go. Then we have the present value, which is the 160. That's going to be absolute. We do not want it to move down, $ before the B and 4. You can use F4 on the keyboard to do so. If we then copy that down, we can put our cursor on it, double click the fill handle, and that'll copy it on down. So this would be the years that we can see side by side, but it's a little bit messy. So we might say, hey, if let's round it up to the nearest increment of 5. So that would mean that this would round up to 40, this would round up to 30, this would round up to 25, this would round up to 20. And so to do that, we're going to use that same function here, but instead of embedding it, we're just going to put it right here so it'll look a little bit easier. We're going to say this will equal the ceiling math, ceiling.math, double clicking on that. And then we're just going to pick up the number, which is the item to the left of it, comma, and then we're going to take it to -5, and enter. And that rounds it up to nice 40. If I copy that down, double clicking down, then here's the years, right? So if I had the $800 payment, 40 years, we would round up from 35.91 to 40 years. If I had a $900 payment, we would round up from 27 years to 30 years. If I had a $100,000 payment, we would round up from 22 to 25. $1,100 payment, rounding from 18 something to 20, and so on and so forth. So we can see our side-by-side comparison. Let's do our highlighting here. Font group, let's put some borders around it. That blue, and then we'll put some borders around that. So there we have that. So there we have it. Okay, so that's that. Now the next thing we could say, okay, well, if I pick up that $1,000 here on the drop down, let's pick it up from a drop down, adding the drop down now, adding our range, go into the data tab up top, tools, we're going to hit our range here, and I would like to make this coming from the list down below. So I'm going to say make this come from the list, and the source of that list will be these items. So sourcing the list, and okay. So now we got this nice drop down. So that $1,000 is coming from the list here. I can remove the pennies because I don't need pennies in that payment amount. So there we have that. So I've got the 1,000, but then that's gonna round it up to 25. Round it up to 25. So that's gonna be the payment that we're gonna put in, nice and round, to figure out the period. But then let's figure out what the payment would actually be after we round it up to the nearest increment of 25. So we're going to do a payment calculation here. So we're going to say, once again, we're going to say, well, I can afford $1,000, and then we're going to get the actual term, which would be around a 25 term, but it wouldn't exactly be $1,000. It would be something slightly different because we couldn't get a loan term at 22.05. We might get a loan term of 25, maybe. And so therefore we got to figure out what the actual payment would be based on the 25-year term. So to do that, that's our payment calculation, negative PMT, shift 9, the rate 5%. That's a yearly rate, so we'll divide it by 12, comma, number of periods is now going to be 300, 25 times 12, or 300, comma, present value is the loan amount, 160,000. So enter. So the actual amount would be more like $935.34. So we're saying we could afford $1,000. How long would the loan term need to be? Around 25, taking it to increments of 25. The actual amount of the payment then would be less than $1,935 under the amount that we were looking for. Okay, so then you can see the table over here would populate for us. Obviously, again, the table is going to go down to 40 periods. If I go down to 25 down here, 25 years, it zeroes out. So that looks correct. And then the table keeps on going. So we're just going to kind of ignore the rest of the table using this table then. And it goes down to 40, by the way, now instead of 30. This table then is just being used for us to kind of help to break out the interest and principal by period. And then we can see what the total payments would be by simply taking the payments times the, not times the 360. I got to change this field. This would equal the payments, which would be this number, times the 300 payments, which would be the months that are going to be involved, and the interest would be the loan amount minus the total payments. So we'll highlight that blue since we fixed that one. Okay, so now we'll add our pivot table. So we'll do our pivot table. We got our slicer over here, does our slicing thing, and so on. And then we can add the pivot table. So to do that, we're going to go into the Insert tab. We're going to go to Tables and say Pivot Table. We want to make sure we're going to Existing Table. Make sure we're up top in column L here. We're looking at column L, and we're going to say OK. There's our pivot table. We'll create this quickly because we've done it many times at this point. We're going to say years, pulling that over to the rows column. We got the payment. We got the interest. We got the loan. We got the loan balance. Let's do some formatting. Selecting the sum drop down. We're going to value this one. We want to make number value, currency, brackets, no dollar sign, no decimals. Okay, okay. Then we're going to go to the interest value fields. We want to make that number format, currency, brackets, no dollar sign, no decimals. Okay, okay. Next one, sum loan reduction, value field settings, number format, currency, brackets, dollar sign gone, no decimals. Okay, okay. Last one's a little bit tricky, a little bit different. The ending loan balance. We don't want the sum function, but the min to pick up the minimum balance in those years. Numbers, currency, brackets, dollar sign gone, decimals gone. Okay, okay. And then we'll put our brackets around it, bracketizing it. And notice, again, we got those negative numbers when we have an amount that's less than the 40-year term, but that's okay because it comes down to 0 here, so we still feel good about it. It should still work, even though it's a little ugly. But that's not as fancy-pantsy as we would like to have it. But I got okay, in any case, we're gonna select those, and let's center these ones. We're gonna go to the alignment and center. And then let's go ahead and do our header thing where we go to the home tab, font group, make that black and white. Let's wrap it, alignment, wrapping it. And then we'll center it, and then we'll select our headers and squish them together. Squish, squish, squash. And then let's go ahead and center these, alignment and center these. Doesn't look like they're all centered, does it? Okay. So then we could build from that our other information as we choose. I'll just do that fairly quickly here just to give us an example as we've seen in the past. we're going to say term change. We're going to change the term. I'm going to say Alt-Enter. So term change, and I'm going to say Alt-Enter. So I go down to the cell below it without hitting the wrap text. I'm going to say 5%. 5%, I got it backwards. Sorry about that. Interest payments. And then the headers underneath that are going to be years. I'm going to say $800 payment that I can afford, a $1,200, and then a $1,600. I would like to center this across those 4 cells, which we can do by going to the Home tab, merging across, but then it merges those cells. I don't like to do that, so I'm going to click it again. Right click is the way I like to do it, so I'm going to do it this way. Format cells, we go to the alignment, we go to the horizontal, and then center it across and say OK, and there we have it, way better. Now we got this big gap over here. If you put your cursor right up under the row and double click on it, it usually shortens up that gap. Let's center these items, go into the Home tab, alignment, centering. Let's make this whole thing black and white. Font group, we'll make it black and white, black and white. There we go. Let's put the years down from 1, 2, buckle or tie my shoelace, please, and we'll drag that down on the way down. I don't have any buckles on the shoes. We'll drag that down to 40. We're going to then say Home tab, alignment, and center those items. And there we have it. Let's do our other table. And we could set it up in a similar fashion. It would look something like this. We'd say term change. That's what we're going to change, or the changing factor. Alt enter, going down to the cell below, 5% loan balance. We're going to look at the loan balance this time. And let's say the headers are going to be equal to the same thing, the years. I'm going to copy that across, Control C, right arrow, holding down Shift, left, right, Control V. Then I'm going to use the Format Painter, selecting this whole thing, and then go to the Home tab, Paintbrushy, Format Painter, paint it on there. Paint the format on there, please. So that's going to be our thing. So we got these different amounts that we think we're going to pay. Now that's the amount that we're going to round. So let's see how this will work. If I go all the way to the left, I'm going to say, let's bring this on down to 800 in the drop down. 800 in the drop down. There's the 800. So if we look down here, that would be a 35-year, 35.91 term, which rounds up, which is going to round quite a ways because it's just barely over 35, but it's going to round up then to 40. So the 40 is what we are actually going to be calculating our information on. If we use 40, then the payment will not actually be 800, it'll be 771.51, which is a little bit less than the 800. So that's what we will then be using. So it's a 40-year. We're going to go on over to our table over here. Let's right-click on the table, refresh it, and there we have it. Now I'm going to copy the interest. So I'm going to copy the interest all the way down for 4T periods. Control C, copy, and I'm going to be pasting this in our data set right there in the 800. Right click and pasting it 1, 2, 3. We're going to copy the loan balance for 4T periods all the way down. Copy, Control C, pasting it 1, 2, 3. Let's see, well, what would happen if I can afford $1,200 on the payment and change the loan term? Let's hit the drop down. What did I say, 1,200? I think that's what I said. So that would mean 1,200, looking at our table, it would be about a loan term of 16.25, which if we round up in increments of 5 would be 20. 20 is what we'll actually be using, and that means that the amount of the payment will actually be a little bit less. It'll be $1,055.93. Let's refresh our table then. Right click on the table here, refresh it, freshen it up, copy the interest amounts just to build our other table. Notice we only need to go down 20 periods. All the negative numbers are not relevant for our table building purposes because that's after the loan term. Right click and paste 1, 2, 3 right there. And then the loan balance of the loan. Copy that, right click, Control C, or not right click, just Control C. And then pasting it, right click, pasting it 1, 2, 3. Let's do it one more time. 1,600. What if I could afford 1,600 and change the loan term? Everything else equal. 1,600 would be more exactly a 10.8. So again, it's just barely above 10, which would round up to increment of 5 loans to 15. So we'll use 15 as our loan term, which means the payment would actually be a little bit less than the 1,006, the 1,265.27. So if we then refresh our table over here, right-clicking on the table, refresh, picking up our interest amount just for that 15-year period, for the 15-year, and then pasting it right here, 15-year, pasting it on down, and the loan balance for the 15-year period as well, Paste in it, 1, 2, 3. There we have it. Let's put our numbers here for the years. 1, 2. Please tie my shoelace. And then we're going to drag that down. Home tab, alignment, center. So there we got. Now let's just do some formatting. Selecting the formatting down here, selecting these. I'm going to hold down Control and then select the other side so we can have non-adjacent, non-next to each other cells formatted at one time. Home tab, font group, bucket, bluifying it, and then borderfied, all borders. Total down here, total, let's total it up because it totally could use a total. Equals the SUM, summing up the column. Copying that across, putting our cursor on the fill handle, copy it across. Let's do our border thing here, font group and blue. So there's just an example of kind of what we can do with some of these comparisons if we were to focus on the loan term as the change. So just as you go back and forth and analyze these kind of loans, you could change some of these variables. You could put up whatever worksheet is useful to you to put up. And again, you have a lot of flexibility using Excel to do so.